YouTube! Welcome to Fred's Full Throttle. Today's video is going to be slightly different, but I'd argue a much more important video for any of you that are petrol heads. I'm going to be focusing primarily on why reports of combustion engines disappearing and being replaced by EVs is greatly exaggerated by talking through two really important initiatives that are going to keep those piston engines thumping. And then, of course, I'm going to give an update on 24 Hours of Lemons and our race car build. This should be a pretty thought-provoking video, so I hope you enjoy it. Let's dive right in. The story of the path to EVs and the demise of gas and diesel engines is a complicated one. I'm not going to cover all the little details of the overall situation, as there's volumes of information out there. However, I'm going to summarize it as best I can. As all of you hopefully realize, burning fuel in a car, or any other combustion engine, is inherently harmful to the planet. We're taking what effectively amounts to large amounts of carbon and adding it directly to the atmosphere. Government regulations, laws, and the push of technology have seemingly identified a solution: electric vehicles, EVs. Boasting many benefits, including being quiet or having silent operation, incredible torque, and no emissions, it would seem that these are a home run if you read through the headlines in the news. Laws seem to be quickly heading towards an EV-only future. Many automotive manufacturers have even already announced planned ends to gas-powered product lines. And it can seem that the final direction is all but decided, and that we'll be whirring around in what amounts to electric appliances with no more personality than a toaster, somewhere before the end of the next decade. Is there any hope for car and driving enthusiasts? Are we going to go the way of the gas engine, destined to be relegated to the history books? No, not quite. In fact, not even close. Reports of the demise of combustion technology are greatly exaggerated and unrealistic. While a big piece of any narrative is presentation, the messaging certainly seems like EVs are the only path to our future. But that's not the whole story. As technological advances have shown, time and time again, there are many ways to solve a problem. In very complicated systems with millions of points of interaction, such as the global energy production and consumption ecosystem, there rarely, if ever, is one single, simple answer that addresses all the problems with a single or even small number of solutions. Without covering every aspect of the problem with the premise that EVs are the only future, here are a few of the headlines that indicate that that statement just isn't true. Massive infrastructure changes take decades, especially when whole industries are built around supporting that infrastructure. Financially, the average person can't afford to go buy a new EV to replace the gas cars that they have with an EV. The infrastructure isn't ready. There just isn't the charging, maintenance, and production infrastructure that's needed for widespread adoption. Electricity storage options, such as batteries and capacitors, are just not where they need to be. Capacity, charging times, even the materials they're created from, are not where they need to be for widespread adoption. There's a finite amount of many of the rare earth metals and materials that are going to, at least currently, be needed to build what we consider to be the current high-tech batteries and motors. There will need to be discoveries of simpler, more abundant types of battery materials and magnet technology, as the current supply of what we use currently literally cannot keep up with the amount of demand there will be. Cities are the only place where EVs currently make sense for the average person. Dealerships for service, plenty of charging infrastructure, and shorter distances to travel speak to why EV adoption outside of major metro areas is absolutely minimal. At best, we're off to a good start with EVs, but that's it, a good start. It is far from a foregone conclusion that the news or EV advocates would have you believe. So, with the above being true, what hope is there for the humble car and driving enthusiast who likes a combustion engine? For people who like the sound, the smell, and character of an older technology? It turns out, plenty. And in fact, you're not alone in the desire to see the combustion engine continue. At the end of 2022, Toyota Chief Executive Akio Toyoda spoke at a press conference and made a pretty big statement. He said that he is among the silent majority of those in the automotive industry who question whether electric vehicles are the only way forward. He reiterated earlier statements that his and Toyota's belief is that the best way forward is to develop a variety of different powertrain technologies rather than go all in on one solution. Other manufacturers with a similar stance include Mazda, Subaru, and Kawasaki. While some manufacturers have been quick to jump on the bandwagon of committing to ending gas-powered vehicles, Toyota has committed to working on a diverse set of solutions. One of the more interesting solutions that Toyota has been testing is hydrogen-powered vehicles. Hydrogen burns clean, only releasing water and heat as exhaust. It's also the most abundant element in the universe, and for nearly a decade, Toyota has been quietly offering a car called the Mirai, which is powered by a hydrogen engine and fuel cell. Toyota started testing hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, FCVs, as far back as 1992. That technology has come a long way and is rapidly progressing. Fueling the Mirai takes only 5 minutes, using a system very similar to a gas pump. Range is between 350 and 400 miles depending on the model. In addition to the Mirai, Toyota has been playing around with converting existing gas-powered engines to hydrogen power. They've started building some of their race cars to run on hydrogen, able to be filled up in 90 seconds. Further, in a recent partnership with Yamaha, they designed a V8 based off a Lexus RC Coupe engine, which produces 442 horsepower and 400 pound-feet of torque. Pictures of the engine are pretty wild, with an 8-1 header, which produces a unique, higher-pitched growl. This continued work and research heads toward a future where we can potentially convert existing gas engines to hydrogen, and where some new vehicles retain the character of their gas-powered counterparts. So, how do we get hydrogen? In the simplest way, we can get hydrogen from water through electrolysis. Take a source of electricity and run a wire from that into the water, with the positive and negative ends of the wire separated. Electricity will flow between those two ends, and in doing so, bubbles will form on the end of the two wires. On the positive wire, the anode, pure oxygen bubbles form. On the negative wire, the cathode, pure hydrogen gas bubbles form. Collect these two gases, and voila, you have two valuable materials. However, there's a problem. That process I just mentioned uses more energy than it generates. But if scientists have taught us anything, there are many ways to solve a problem. You can use solar or wind power to generate the electricity needed. You can use catalysts to speed up the process. There's development in various membranes and barriers which can simplify and streamline this process. And research facilities like the University of Michigan are working on ways to photosynthesize water, similar to what plants do, using solar power. Recent advances in these processes are improving efficiency and heading towards a place where economies of scale can make the process viable financially. Now, I think all that's exciting, to know that things aren't as bleak as it seems, and that the combustion engine will continue long into the future. But I hear you. What about the cars you currently own? What about that muscle car that's been in your family for 50 years? What about that project car that is your pride and joy? What if you have a vehicle that you don't want to convert to hydrogen? Is there a path forward for you? Yes. As unlikely as it may sound, one of the most storied and well-regarded sports car manufacturers has decided to take another path, separate from hydrogen, which sounds quite promising. While Porsche has already shown that they can build amazing EVs with its Taycan and the forthcoming electric Caymans, Boxsters, and Macans, they also recognized that enthusiasts out there also want to enjoy the gas-powered cars that they already own. Enter e-fuel. In 2021, Porsche announced that they were building a pilot facility to research and explore the production of e-fuels for use in regular gas-powered cars. In late 2022, the first facility opened in Chile, and production is already underway. So first of all, what is e-fuel? Well, besides a bit of corny-sounding name to make you think it's a fancy and futuristic thing, e-fuel is pretty amazing. It's a carbon-neutral gasoline, which can run in any normal gas-powered car. Wait a minute, how do you make carbon-neutral gasoline? Well, that's the amazing part. It's created from water and CO2, specifically CO2 that's been pulled from the air you're breathing. Porsche's cutting-edge facility makes use of a giant wind turbine to power the plant. And then through a proprietary process, they're able to synthesize first methanol and then upconvert that into pure gasoline. Chile specifically was selected because it's one of the windiest places in the world, with strong winds on average 270 days out of the year. By powering the plant with wind and then pulling the CO2 via the air from carbon capture methods, they produce a fuel that's carbon neutral, meaning it's a net zero additive to the atmosphere because that's where the carbon already came from. The only non-carbon neutral part of a car that uses this fuel then just becomes the oil in the engine used for lubrication. While the pilot plant is a technology demonstrator to prove the viability of such an approach, Porsche is already using the fuel in some high visibility applications to start growing some of that awareness. Their car racing programs are already testing using these fuels to race with, and soon their Porsche Experience Center facilities will be powering all of their gas-powered vehicles with e-fuel made at that plant. The pilot facility is small, and the output is fairly low, but they've actually already started commercial production of this e-fuel. Initial output volume is low, around 34,000 gallons by this year, but within 5 years they're going to bump that to 55 million gallons. And by year 7 they're targeting 10 times that, all from this pilot plant. And that's the thing, this is a pilot plant. There are already plans to develop true industrial-sized facilities like this around the globe, powered by sustainable green power sources, which would be able to produce orders of magnitude more e-fuel than this one small pilot plant. Now let's unpack this a bit and talk about what this actually means. At first glance, it seems a bit too good to be true. How can you make gasoline from the air? And how do you do it in a sustainable, environmentally neutral way? While it does sound a bit like science fiction, I can assure you it's anything but. Now, Porsche on its own certainly has vast resources as being part of the Volkswagen Group, but an initiative like this needs support and buy-in from others. To that end, this project is part of a partnership with Siemens Energy and ExxonMobil, who are deeply involved in the production technology. Exxon clearly knows a thing or two about distribution and mass production of fuels in general, and you can imagine that they're chomping at the bit to have a carbon-neutral offering in its portfolio. Now, let's talk for a moment about cost. As it currently stands, 1 gallon of the currently produced e-fuel, with all expenses factored in, is roughly $87. Not really viable from a business perspective. But with the planned production volumes and expansion of the technology, Porsche is stating that they expect this to be able to sell commercially somewhere around $7 a gallon. If other companies license that technology and it's produced in sufficient quantities, that number could drop even lower. Certainly not cheap, but that's approaching a realistic cost, especially if regular gasoline production ever starts declining as EV adoption grows and regular gas starts to grow in price. One other aspect that I think is amazing about this is that it works in any gasoline-powered car, because at the molecular level, it's just plain old gasoline. This means no modifications for cars that want to be run on it. This means that we can still fill up at a gas pump and tune and tinker in our own garages with our engines. This is huge. The other big takeaway here is that as long as you can find a way to power these plants and source for water, you can build one anywhere. The raw material besides water is literally just the atmosphere we breathe. Pretty amazing if you ask me. Fred's take. Alright, so what's my take on all this? First, I think that solving our energy and propulsion challenges are incredibly complex and multifaceted problems. As an engineer, I know that rarely, if ever, is a solution black and white, especially the more complex a problem becomes. I think that EVs will play a part in our future society, but not the whole thing. I also think that alternatives such as hydrogen or e-fuel fill in gaps in that plan. I think that other factors, like cost of adoption for end customers, plays a big role too. Movement and adoption will be slow until the average person can afford it, and we're a long way away from that. I frequently hear some people say, "I'll never drive an EV or hybrid. It's gas or nothing for me." Unfortunately, politics and polarization have stirred people into a frenzy. Change is part of life, and if you look at any decade on this planet and compare it with the decades that followed, there's always been advances in technology and changes in what's normal. In most of our lifetimes, I don't think we'll see a complete adoption of anything, much less EVs. So those who steadfastly resist will be able to do so. But I also do think there's room for change. Personally, I love driving. I started a car club that's now got over 100 members. I made my YouTube channel to celebrate my love of cars and of driving. And I ooh and ah over every sports car I see on the road, and I love the culture of cars. But I also think that as long as we have an outlet to have fun in a car, I'm not necessarily tied to any one platform. I'll give you an example. When I bought my new Tacoma last year, I actually had been following Rivian pretty closely, considering potentially looking into one of those. I like the idea of charging at home, of 400 miles of range on a single charge, and a bit of a rethink on the way a truck can work. But beside the long wait list, several things held me back. Inconsistent and infrequent charging locations outside of major cities, the need to plan your longer drives based on where you charge, the cost of the vehicle, etc. To me, there's no incentive to be an early adopter, but over time I think that will change. I look at it much like the horse and buggies when the car was invented. Slow adoption at first, growth over time, and then a variety of options after that. I see a world where you may own an EV for your day-to-day driving and errands, but then you have the fun car back at home that runs on e-fuel or hydrogen for those weekend drives or for track days. Maybe a hydrogen-powered car instead of an EV. Right now, nothing is certain yet, but all of this is going to play out over years, if not decades, so there's no sense in getting all worked up about it right now. And certainly not to hate new technology just because it's not what you're used to. And thanks to Porsche and others, if you have a gas car that you love, you'll likely be able to drive it for the rest of your life. Pretty amazing. Whoa, that turned out to be a lot more to unpack than I expected, and I'm really just scratching the surface. Let's move on to a Lemons update. Myself and the team have been meeting every weekend to work on the car. While the winter weather is upon us, it makes sense to get as much done as we can when we don't really want to be outside, so that we have the hardest stuff done before spring arrives.
And back here. Fred has both of them right now. How about I do this? We found the power steering pump. Found it by mistake? No.
Yeah, okay.
Alright, I'm gonna try to go get Winter inside.
You get it?
Yeah, you can move.
That's awesome. Last weekend, we were working on the car and made a bunch of progress. We stripped out the last bit of interior insulation and carpet. We removed the rest of the curtain airbags, the steering wheel airbag, and the control modules. We then removed the entire dashboard, which will help with the roll cage install. We also removed the wheels, which were more or less frozen to the hubs due to corrosion. In doing so, we discovered our first big problem. The two front wheels on the car are narrower than the rear wheels, 7.5 inches instead of the 8.5s in the back. Since our rear wheels are wider and our full-size spare is, we bought an additional wheel. So we have 6 wheels, however 2 of them are an inch narrower than we expected. When we bought the car, we checked the tire sidewalls on all 4 corners, and they were all the same, meaning that the front tires right now are mounted on narrower wheels than intended. It's not the end of the world, and clearly it fits, but it does make for a bit more play in the front of the car if we use them. So we're evaluating buying 2 more wheels and selling the 7.5s. We'll be getting our new tires mounted once we figure that out. We also mounted the racing seat in the car and then discovered that we have very minimal head clearance for the roll cage, especially when we factor in wearing a helmet. We need to have a minimum of 2 inches of clearance from the top of the helmet to the top of the cage. The more the better. Several of us are well over 6 feet tall. Our seat currently mounts to the floor with a bracket. Then on top of the bracket we add a locking slider mechanism so that we can slide the seat up and down for shorter drivers. This all works great, however the bracket and the sliders add roughly 3 inches of height to the seat. So we're rethinking our mounting setup and are likely going to go with something a little bit more fixed to save us about 2 inches out of that. We don't want to be any closer to the limits than we need to be, especially where safety is concerned. Overall though, now we're at the point where all the small stuff is pretty much done, and next it's on to some of the bigger things, like reinforcing the subframe of the car and really pulling things apart. I'm really enjoying the whole process and already feeling like I'm growing in my understanding of all the internal mechanisms of how the car works, and everything is a little bit less scary, a little less unknown. Exciting stuff. Stay tuned, there's a lot more to come, and we've got some big things coming soon. So thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed this, and until next time, Fred out!